Hi, Donna from Generations United, and I'm also from Oregon, so it's nice to have two of us here without accents. But my question really, I wanted to ask Wes, and perhaps you've got some thoughts about it as well. Wes, you know that I totally love your mother. I'm a huge fan of your mom. And I know that you've talked oftentimes about the role of your mom, but also the role of your grandparents in being there and helping and supporting the family. And we know, especially with a lot of what's happening now with the opioid epidemic in Yamhill and other places, that grandparents are the ones that are having to step in and take care of the children that are left behind. So I just wonder, as you're thinking forward about this strategy, what you're thinking about when it comes to that, the role of either skipped generations or multi-generational households, and also older adults in general in this country. Thank you.
It is, so first, I adore Donna and her work. And so, and I'm going to give you a quick shout out and plug too. When we talk about this idea of how do you turn narrative into change, I just want to very quickly talk about, there was a documentary, and remind me of the year, 2001, called Legacy. Very briefly, this documentary was going to follow a young man who's growing up in Chicago, who was really such an outlier from everything else in his community. And this documentary was going to follow this young man to figure out what was going on with him in his life, to be able to better understand how we can scale that. Very early into pulling together the content for the documentary, that young man was shot and killed. And so there was a question about, so how do we tell the story when the subject of this documentary is no longer around? But they found something really interesting, and that was the grandmother. He was being raised by his grandmother, who had a remarkable story in and of herself. And so the documentary then shifted to not necessarily be about this young man, but about his grandmother. His documentary turned into something called Legacy, which was eventually nominated for an Oscar, and then turned into the Legacy Act, right? And so it's how exactly are we supporting grand family housing and grand family situations and relationships that started off with a documentary that then turned into legislation. And so one of the powerful things and really exciting things about that is, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we can't talk about these different dynamics as if they are, one generation dynamics. You know, the best way to be able to help and support a child is make sure they're coming up in a strong, supportive home. And sometimes those homes are non-traditional homes. And that means, how are we thinking about this thing from a 1 and a 2 and a 3, and in some cases a 4-generation context, and how that works? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, and my mom is, I always say, I feel like the greatest gift God gave me was He asked Joy Moore to give birth to me. And it was something that I didn't ask for, and it was something that I'm thankful for every day. But I also know if my mom was sitting here right now, she would tell you, had it not been for my grandparents, who gave her the support when she needed it most, that not just her story, but my story and the story of my sisters would have been very different too. So I think you have to think about this from a multi-generational perspective in terms of how we think about supports and engagement.